different formats, so files or data that is in a format to convert it in another format. So this is an overview of what the 5.4.4 is able to, all the formats that are able to convert. Some of them, not all of them convert into each of them. For that, I will show you the next slide, which has a precise and detailed information of what each of them converts into. But generally speaking, of course, we can convert from and to version 2.0 and version 2.1. Within 2.0, which, by the way, the technical specification were released in 2004, and the version 2.1 in 2005. That doesn't mean that there are no data being exchanged in version 2.0. In fact, there are. So within the 2.0, we have generic, compact, utility, and cross-sectional. Generic is the generic one. Compact is the reduced way of or the reduced version of SDMX ML. So it's compact, as the name says. So it's less easy to understand. Once, of course, you understand it for a human eye, but in principle, it's just, of course, it tries to reduce the weight of the data that is going to be exchanged, and that is intended for those, or especially it was created for large data files. So if you are exchanging a large data file, you might consider to use the compact. The utility was developed for, it pays more attention, focuses on validation, the cross-sectional. The other three are time series, and the cross-sectional means that specific one is only intended for data that are cross-sectional, so they are not time series. In version 2.1, we have generic, structure specific. Those two are for cross-sectional data. And if you are using time series, you have the generic, time series, or the structure specific. Then you have other formats that can be used in the conversion. So GSMS, which is like some ways it is together with the version 1.0 of the SDMX. You have CSV, FLR, the data structure language by Google, and ad hoc Excel templates, which are no longer developed. So they are maintained, those ones that are available, but we are not developing new ones. So USDA is maintaining those that have been in use or are still in use, but we are not developing new ad hoc Excel templates. So as I mentioned, this is a complete overview. So for instance, with CSV, of course, the system doesn't support from CSV to CSV because there is no conversion there. But the system is able to convert from CSV as an input format into, you see, SDMX generic, SDMX compact, SDMX utility, or SDMX 2.1. Another example, for instance, SDMX generic. So we can, as an input file, we can convert an file that is in SDMX generic format into CSV, into GSMS, into compact, into SDMX utility, etc. This is available, by the way, on the user manual that is available on the CircaVC that I showed to you a few minutes ago. So how does what are the main requirements if we want to make this conversion work using the SDMX converter? We need an input file. Of course, we need the file that we want to convert, and we need to specify in the converter what is the format of that file. So if we are using a CSV, we need the CSV file, as well as we need to specify in the SDMX converter that the file is CSV. And for some formats, it recognizes immediately. Some other formats, so it's better to double check that the format is being properly recognized by the tool. Then we need the artifact, the DSD, the data structure definition, which is the one enabling or modeling the data within the SDMX initiative. These can be locally stored, so if we have access, if we have gone or we have created ourselves and we have the DSD installed, saved in our PC, then we can just upload it, the same as the input file. Or, in principle, we could connect our locally installed converter to the SDMX registry, which the converter will call the registry, the Euro SDMX registry, to download or to access the specific DSD. If you're accessing the Euro SDMX registry, we can also opt for the data flow, which also contains the information that will enable the converter make the conversion. Then there are other bits that might be required depending on the conversion that we are just about to make. So, for instance, there's a section on the CSV header. So if we are converting from or to CSV, that will be required. If we are converting from one SDMXML format to another one, let's say generic into compact, that section is not, we do not need to fill it in, basically. Then we will, of course, perform the conversion, and then we will get the output file, so the converted file in the selected or in the expected format. So quickly, so the first two are the ones that we are going to be using today in the examples. We will use the user interface to convert from CSV to XML and from XML back to CSV. We will use the command line to execute a script that is created using the user guidelines in order to, but of course, this script will be calling the converter, and we will get exactly the very same file that if we are using the user interface. Then the other two ways that we have mentioned earlier and that are available in CircuitBC for version 5.4.4 at the web service and the API. The API are those libraries that are available and can be reused or in our system, provided that our developers rightly insert them in our system. In order to have the functionalities that are available in the converter in our system. Okay, so we focus on the graphical user interface. This is what version 5.4.4 looks like. The first thing is the input and the output. So of course, in any conversion, we need the input file, and that is the first thing that we need to make sure to upload to the system. We need to tell the system where we want our output file to be stored. So when the conversion, after processing the conversion, where the system will place the converted file. And on the right, we have the format. So as I said, it's better to double check whether the converter is rightly identifying the input format. The output format, we need to make sure that we select the appropriate one. Then we go on to the DSD. We mentioned that there are two ways. Option A is that we have the DSD safe in our local install. If we have it locally available, then we can just browse and select it. If we are to use the registry, we need to link our converter. We need to link it to the registry. If that is the case, that we have done it, we will have to provide like any other artifact. So a DSD is okay, it's a major artifact within the SDMX initiative because it's the one that models data. But any other artifact, it will be described exactly the same. So we always, when artifacts are available on the registries, They are, well, the way that they are shown are by the agency, the ID of the artifact, and the version. So those three pieces of information will have to be identified here in order for the converter to select or to retrieve the correct artifact that we are interested in. Versions, so agency, for instance, will be Eurostat for Eurostat. The DSD ID, well, it depends. The specific one, it could be TIC, I think it's the one we're going to be using today. And then the version, if you don't know the version, you have, well, you can either go to the SDMX info space where we try to keep the information updated, including the versioning of the current DSDs, or you contact your contact person here in Eurostat to double or to verify or to get the version of the specific DSD. I mentioned that if you are connected, if you have connected your converter to the Euro SDMX registry, you can opt for using the DSD or the data flow. If you prefer using the data flow, then you will again have to identify the agency of that specific data flow, which is likely to be STAT for Eurostat, the ID of that data flow, and the version. This is exactly the same as the DSD. And it would be exactly the same for any other artifact that is stored in the Euro SDMX registry. So the way to identify them are by agency, the ID of the artifact, and the version. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of the formats that is, or the converter supports in converting is the Excel. So when we have another Excel, I mentioned that we're not developing, Eurostat is not developing new ones, but is maintaining or supporting those that have been in place or are being used. So we might have, if that is our format that we want to convert from, we will need the parameter file. The parameter file might come as an extra file, or it might be embedded into the Excel file. In the case we will use an exercise today, and in our case, it will be embedded in the Excel file, so there is no need to use the parameter file box. Then the header. So there are two headers, and there is a specific slide on this, but just briefly to mention that SDMX uses the XML message, and in the XML message, you need, in the SDMX XML message, you have a header. This is a prerequisite. So every SDMX XML, they have a header, and that header, if we are, for instance, as we are today, or we will be today, so converting from CSV, we will need to create a specific header for that to be filled in, because the converter cannot produce an SDMX XML file without a header. So we need to, if we don't have it, it would be different if we are converting from an SDMX XML format, so from utility to compa, or the other way around, because it's already, they will have a header, an SDMX ML header. If you don't have one, like in the case of a CSV file, you will have to create one. Or you can use one that is already available. We will do both. Then mapping is to map the information to the DSD we are using, or the data flow, so the components that are included in the DSD. If it's the default mapping, it means that we will be using the information as it is covered in the DSD. And escape or escape is, whether we are using or we want to use the escape in our CSV. If we are not using CSV either as an output or input, we don't need to pay attention to this. The same goes here. So input order is that the way that our columns in our columns, and the order that is used in our CSV file, whether we want that to follow, so whether that follows that of the DSD, The header row, whether we have three options, whether there are no column headers, whether they are, and we are using them, and whether they are, but we are not using them. Then the delimiter is, well, even if it's called comma separated value, it could be semicolon, like in the example, or it could be comma separated, point separated, etc. The right header is that if we want to have an output, as an output, the header that is coming from this header, the XML header. So imagine that we are converting from XML to CSV, and we want to keep that header for future processes. So we can keep that by clicking on write the header. Then SDMX validation. I mentioned to you that the next version, the 7.3, hopefully 0.2, which will be in production, will pay a lot more, or will focus a lot more on validation. So in any case, the current version, this version, the 5.4.4, validates as well using the information that is on the DSD. And it's a functionality is available, and we will be making use of it. The namescape, which is out of these, is, there are other, these are components that are, again, as exactly the same as the header, the SDMX-ML header. These are components, and this is a prerequisite in the messages, in the XML messages, that we need to have a namespace and a prefix, which are made up of the sender, in this could be Eurostat, and the specific namespace for the domain that we are exchanging the data. If we don't tick, tick here, so it means that it will be producing it according to the information that is in the DSD. Okay, and then we will click on convert. So the header. So you have with an asterisk what is obligatory in the header. So it's the ID. If we don't know the ID, we can ask again our contact person here in Eurostat, and the sender. If we click on the provide sender info, it will be also an ID that we need to fill in. That would be our ID. You see ID here, and this is also prerequisite. The ID, both IDs are compulsory. And this edit header from XML or SDMX-ML is different to the CSV header. So please do not confuse them, or do not get mixed up by them. Do not mix them up. So one is the header that will appear on the XML message that is transmitted, and the other one is the header that might be or might not be available on the CSV file. These are the examples of what they look like. So the header in SDMX, ML, and in CSV. Mapping. So the way that the conversion will be done, so we have here, we have tick. If it's tick, it's default mapping, so it means that it will use the order that the DSD that we are using in order to model the input file into the output file. If we want to change this order, if we want to map to have a different mapping, then we can click on this change mapping. So by default, it's just giving the first that comes, it will be, or in this case, frequency adjustment reference. So it's just giving the order as is listed in the DSD. If we want to change that order, because it differs the order in our input file to that is described in the DSD, we need to change the mapping and do it here. We might have that file. If that is the case, we click on load from file. If not, we need to do it manually here. Transcoding is another, well, I mentioned to you earlier that some code list, like frequency, have been developed and agreed. by of course, all the materials that is being released by the statistical working group. It means that it's being agreed by the different partners of the SDMX, and everyone that is using or is implementing SDMX should be using those specific code lists. So, for instance, we might be using a different code list, and we need to transcode. So it means that, or simply a different. Well, this is, for instance, for frequency, the way that, according to SDMX, if we have it differently, we can, or if we have in native language, we can change that from the specific input file. So, for instance, if I have anual in Spanish, I can use the A, which would be the code, which in parentheses means annual, and according to the SDMX guidelines. That is basically what it means. The command lines is the, we have seen that we have different access or different ways to access or to access the functionalities available in the SDMX Converter. We have the user interface, which we have seen more or less an overview of all the functionalities and how to operate with it. We have the possibility, if we do not have administrator rights, to download the executable BAT file. We need to create a script according to the guidelines that are described in the user guide, and we will be able to convert file from input file into output file. And this we will do. This is an example at the bottom. We can do this by using Windows. We can also do it using Unix. Here it says for automated conversion. It's also intended, of course, for those that have many files to be converted. Rather than doing manually one by one, you can just write the script and then getting done with. This is overall what is according to the user guidelines. So we need to specify where the converter is, the input and output file, and the format of our input file and the format of our output file. Since we are using, well, it's a Windows operating system, we will be using this BAT, but if you're using Unix, it would be SH. In between, so we have seen that, for instance, the CSV information, it is only intended to be used, or it's a prerequisite if we are converting from CSV, for instance. But if we are converting from and to SDMX format, so SDMX ML compact to generic, we do not need to use, for instance, the header row. Yeah. If you are not mapping, if the mapping is coming from the DSD, if the mapping is correct, and we do not need to provide an extra mapping or correct mapping, we do not need to use this extension, the mapping file, and then locate the mapping file, where the mapping file is. As I mentioned, this is described in more detail in the user manual available on CKBC. This is to wrap up. Remember, we can convert manually, as we are doing, sort of manually, using the SDMX Converter, where we push the information to Eurostat as a data provider. It's a standalone application, or that we can put it on the server. It requires, of course, an input file and can generate SDMX ML files as an output, but it can also use them as an input. Now, the reference infrastructure is the other option we have. It will be installed in the server. The reference infrastructure connects the dissemination database with the outside world and generate